pianists and colleagues and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the very famous Ballade by Johann Burgmüller. It sounds like this. And on from there. I know you know how this sounds. This has to rank in the top fun pieces for students to play. This is very highly played by piano students. For that reason, sometimes teachers don't enjoy teaching it because it's just overplayed and we always encounter the same problems in pieces like this. But of the overplayed pieces, this is one of my favorites. It's so dramatic and there is so much opportunity for students to engage imaginatively, as well as being a really great technical etude. So there you have it. Today I'm looking at this in the Palmer, the Alfred Masterworks of the Burgmüller Op.100. If you are not familiar with the whole set, it has many well-loved pieces, and they really are superior etudes for intermediate piano students. They are interesting and beautiful and dramatic, as well as really doing a very good job of focusing on individual piano techniques. So there's several in here that I teach on a very regular basis. For my Illinois colleagues, this is on our AIM Level 6, and I do think it is a great Level 6 exam piece. All right, so what do our students need to be able to know in order to play this piece? Well, this is a very, very catchy piece, and so it's one that I think is totally fine to use a little rote teaching with. That said, we do want to make sure our students are engaged with the score and able to read everything that they're encountering. So the main things here would be a C minor key signature, which then modulates to the parallel major C major in the B section, as well as this 3/8 time signature. And 3/8 might be new to a student at this point, or they might not have just played a lot in 3/8, they might have had a few experiences. So it's really important that they understand that in 3/8 time, yes, it means 3 beats in a measure where the 8th note is getting the beat, and that's very easy to see with the opening chords, the repeated right hand, 8th notes there. But it should be felt in 1. All compound meter 3/8, 6/8, 9/8 should be felt in the dotted quarter note pulse. So really we're going to feel this 1 and 2 and da 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 da. Within that, we also have 16th notes, which if your student has done a lot of work with 16th notes in common time or in 3/4 or 2/4, they're going to automatically start to count those 1E and a. And remember in 3/8 in compound meter, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, then the 16th notes get 1 and 2 and 3 and. So I do think it's important for students to understand how this works, but they're also just going to pick up this main theme by rote or by ear very, very quickly without having to think too much about what they're doing rhythmically, and I think that's okay in a piece like this. This is an etude of left hand having fast moving notes while the right hand is playing pretty static repeated chords. So one of the main things you have to address, of course, is playing those left hand 16th notes very, very cleanly and evenly. I'm not going to go into a lot of technique here, but if you have worked with any rotation exercises or Taubman-like technique, of which I am not an expert, it is helpful to think about doing little tiny rotations for this. So you're going back and forth on that C, B, C with that wrist rotation and really rotating up here to fall into the finger 4 on G. Instead of thinking that the fingers are doing all the work and that you're pulling up with the joints like this from the knuckle, that will just give your student a lot of tension. And if instead you can have a lovely natural hand shape and use rotation to move very quickly, it's a much more effective way to play this and prevent injury. Now we do have a lot of articulation in this piece, and if you've watched any of my videos, you know that articulation is one of my massive priorities. In fact, I even said this to a coaching client recently that I think articulation is my main non-negotiable when students are learning their repertoire. So we have your basic light staccatos in those right-hand chords, the slurs in the left-hand part, and then later on in the B section, the right-hand long phrase markings that are slurred, as well as some sforzandos, which really function like accents. And I think if you look at different editions, you might see slightly different things, But these parts, the A natural in the left hand has a sforzando in my edition, and then we have these little caret accents at the end of the A section, which should be very bright and accented. So do spend some time with your student, even just working hands separate, on making sure the articulation is working really well and that it's a different sound for each articulation, that they're not sounding the same or almost the same. And then your student needs to work on having two different articulations in both hands. So while that right hand plays the very light staccato chords, your left hand is playing the slurs. And then while you're in the B section and the right hand plays the slurs, the left hand, it's not marked staccato, but these, because they're repeated, those left hand chords should be generally light and detached. You don't have any other option besides to make it somewhat short so that you can play it again. Sometimes I hear students play this like this, where the second one is longer, and I do not like how that sounds. I really feel like they should be equal length, or else you get an emphasis on beat 3. So it should be short, 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 while the right hand sings beautifully over that. Etc. There are also some two-note slurs towards the end of that section with the A flat and G flat in the right hand. And two-note slurs tend to be difficult for students until they have done them many, many times. It should be a down-up gesture with a lift after the second note, and the emphasis should be on the first note. It should just be a natural more or less. So taking that one from the G to the C, that should be a down-up or a more or less. And again, while your right hand is doing all of that, the left hand should just be nice and light and short. It can't imitate the right hand. It has to do its own thing. All right, so we have extreme dynamics in this piece, which makes it very dramatic. And that leads us to talking about engaging the imagination in this piece. One of the reasons students like this piece is because it's very evocative, and you really can write a story to this. In fact, every time I teach this piece, I ask my student to write a story, because a ballade is just a musical story. And if you think of the famous Chopin or Brahms ballades, they are also very programmatic in their feel. And you can write your own story or have your own imagination of what is going on in those stories. So I've had all kinds of fun things. I'm going to try to dig out. I know I still have it. One of my students years ago, when she was much younger, she's in college now, she wrote an entire story about how this was a girl who was scared of a spider, and every time you had this part, she saw the spider and said something like, "Oh no!" I had a colleague who taught this piece and was doing this with his student, and it was about a girl who had gone shoe shopping, and a very bumbling salesperson was trying to help her, but he was very awkward, and she would look at the shoes and say, "Not these, not these," and throw the shoes across the room. So you can have a lot of fun getting really creative with whatever is appealing to your particular student, because that will really help them play this well. They'll know where the surprising notes are. That A natural is unexpected. It forms a half diminished chord if you think of all the notes together. It's not a note that we expect in the key of C minor. And then of course, by going to C major and having piano for the dynamic and this beautiful longer phrase as opposed to the shorter phrases before, we get a completely different ethos and completely different feeling, and students should be encouraged to really make those two sections diametrically opposite. All right, I do just want to mention that the ending is typically a massive problem spot for students. The parallel 16th notes can be very, very difficult to play cleanly and clearly. So number one, students need to listen. We have to just draw their ear to it and say, does that sound clear and clean to you? Number two, we can try lots of different technical ways to practice, such as all staccato, or rhythms, or reverse that, or accents on different notes in the group. So by that, if we split these into 3 and 3, then you could do an accent on the first one, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, or the second one of the group of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or the third, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. that's messing with the meter, the purpose of that is to help students hear each note and not be skimming over notes that they don't think are important or that aren't on the strong beats. It's a little bit like a jazz musician feeling the backbeat in a swing rhythm. And then I would just go back to that idea of rotation, that each hand can use some of this rotation and really plan little tiny micro rotations so that they're not trying to pick up fingers or play with individual fingers. Lastly, I think that the most fun and actually one of the best technical parts of this is feeling free to jump and bounce all over the keyboard. So when you have these inverted chords and then the arpeggio, which I feel free to change the fingering on however I want to do it, and then those chords moving around, you are going to want to practice those chords plenty, all of those items, so that your student can move freely across the keyboard and not be spending time finding it and then playing it, but just bouncing back and forth, dropping right into the key to achieve a beautiful tone. I hope that gives you a few ideas on how to teach the Burgmüller Ballade. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would ask you to do that. Please check out the rest of my videos, and I wish you all the best in your teaching.